My name is Brian Redico with the Hydraulics Department. I'm moderating today. With us, can you hear me now? How's that? That's better. Brian Redico with the Hydraulics Department. I'll be moderating today's session. You're going to have Martha here talk about the local program management office. I'm not that familiar with it, so I'm going to learn something new today. Just as a reminder, NC State requires that we wear a mask unless you're speaking or eating. Please make sure you signed up for PDHs. They will be handed out at the end. And there is a scheduling note that I was just noticed, that I was just informed of. The last session does start at 2:30. So there will be a half-hour break for that last session, not 15 minutes. The break will be from 2 to 2:30. So I'll let Martha take it away here.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Everyone can hear me? All right. What we're going to talk about today are municipal agreements, which come through our office, local programs management office. We're going to kind of focus on receivable agreements. We'll talk a little bit more about what those are, but we'll also just talk about our office and what agreements we do and why they're important. Great. Down the right here. So the highlights of this presentation: why do we do agreements? What are any rules about doing agreements? How do I request an agreement if I need one? We'll also talk about that portal, which I know people have a love-hate relationship with. No more paper. We're doing DocuSign on all our agreements. We want to encourage you to encourage your other parties to use DocuSign. We're going to talk about down payments, when we get money from the other party, the timing of it, and obviously any questions or comments that you have. So just to give a little overview about our office and what we do agreements with cities, towns, counties. We do state agreements with state or federal agencies, developers, and other private businesses. We're mostly focused on the highway side of the department. So, for example, we don't do agreements for rail or aviation, public transportation, but we have done some sort of one-off agreements for unique situations. So those groups have come to us and asked us for help in developing an agreement. We've also gone to those units and asked them for help, particularly when we have projects that are non-linear, but some building projects that we deliver on the highway side. We've gotten some assistance from rail on those agreements. We try to share resources as much as possible, but we are pretty much focused on the highway side of the department. All right, so when we talk about agreements, we kind of like you to think in terms of funding. That's how we've structured our agreement types. Sort of money makes the world go around, so that's kind of how we're thinking of it. Accounts payable agreements are when NCDOT is paying the other party. They're doing work and we're reimbursing them for work that they did. Accounts receivable is when DOT is receiving money from the other party. We're doing the work and they've asked to add work onto the project, and so they're paying us for it. We also then reference no funding agreements. These would be no money is changing hands. We might be doing an agreement for maintenance responsibilities. We might be doing an agreement that will set up a future agreement. We're just sort of setting the stage for sort of an intermediate agreement. We might call that a memorandum of understanding. So to get into a little bit more deep dive on the different agreement types, accounts payable, probably the one you might be most familiar with are locally administered projects. This is where the local government is delivering a project with federal or state funding. The funding is coming through DOT, so we are reimbursing them. The other things we do pay for to municipalities are these traffic schedule agreements. Traffic schedules A, B, C, and D, which deal with the traffic signs, pavement markings, signals, and signal systems. So the municipality is maintaining basically the DOT resources, and we're paying them to do the maintenance and operation of those systems. And then there's also routine maintenance, sweeping, mowing, snow removal, things like that. Those are all examples of payable agreements. So receivable agreements, we kind of have four basic types. TIP agreements are when DOT is out there delivering a TIP project, and a municipality or maybe a developer has asked us to include additional work on that project. So they're going to pay us for that work. The DOT construction agreement is when we do work for another party, but the work, they're paying 100% for all the work. So the agreement is basically just for whatever work they've asked us to do. It's not an add-on to the TIP project. Review and oversight, inspection agreements, those are kind of really non-construction agreements. The most typical ones you see are the traffic signals, where the developer comes in and says, I want to put in a traffic signal. They need DOT to review the plans and inspect the installations, $5,000 or $6,000. So that's kind of the typical review and inspection agreement. We also do agreements when the city has said, we think we're going to get federal funding for construction, we need you to review plans. So we set up an agreement for them to give us some money up front, so we have something to charge to while we're reviewing their plans. And then the utility construction agreements are when we are relocating municipal utilities as part of a TIP project, where the cost is the city's responsibility, and they've asked us to include that work in our construction contract. And then the net funding agreements, again, we have a TIP project, and the city has some maintenance responsibilities. We're going to do an agreement for that. We also might do an agreement with no funding right now, but they may pay us if the costs exceed a certain threshold. So there's no commitment, no definite commitment for them to pay, but they may have to pay in the future. And then we do these memorandum of understanding, which basically just outlines everyone's responsibilities. You do this, we'll do this, and we'll all be happy. And then again, that would set the stage perhaps for a future receivable or payable agreement. All right, so what makes a good agreement? An agreement needs to tell a story, and we need to have all the information. When you request an agreement, you want to give us context for why you're entering the agreement. Y'all, if you're requesting agreements, you've had the conversations with the other party. You know what they want, you know what DOT is going to agree to. We need all that information to go into the agreement. We just need some history and some context for why we're doing the agreement. You also want the agreement to be clear for somebody else who might pick it up who has no familiarity with the project or what's going on. They need to be able to read that agreement and understand what's happening. You also want to think about your payment terms. We've had several examples of TIP projects and very complex cost sharing with another party that ends up being difficult at the end of the project when you're trying to close it out and split costs. So just kind of be thinking about that up front if you are doing some sort of cost sharing with the other party. Remember, for counties, developers, basically any non-municipal entity, payment is usually required up front. With municipalities, our collateral is their Payable funds. We don't have that with non-municipal entities. So make sure that those parties understand that they have to pay up front. Split phases of work into separate agreement requests, and I'll get into this a little bit more once we start talking about the portal. But think about, when you're asking, when a city's asked us to add betterments, and they also want us to do the design for those betterments and pay us, think about one agreement for the design and then another agreement for the construction, the wheels work. And any agreement must include either responsibilities or funding, or both. If there's no responsibility on the part of the other party, if there's no funding, probably don't need an agreement. Maybe it just so we're gonna do some questions. I have nothing fancy here. There's no Slido. Just shout out the answer if you know it. So I'm gonna give you some agreement scenarios. You tell me whether it's a payable agreement, a receivable agreement, or net funding. So a developer along a state route has requested that DOT build a turn lane into his property, and we've agreed to do that. So what type of agreement would that be? You're in receivable, yeah, speak up. That's right. All right, city has received TAP funding, that's Transportation Alternative Program funding, for bike lanes and will provide the local match. The city has asked the division to let the project. What type of agreement would we need? You're in receivable. Good job. All right, city has received TAP funding for a greenway and will provide the local match and construct the project. All right, thank you. Good job, you got this. All right, DOT is widening a roadway and per complete streets policy is adding sidewalks at no cost to the city. What type? No funding, good job, yep. There's no, we're absorbing the cost, they're not having to pay us anything. It's just an agreement for maintenance. DOT is widening a state roadway and per complete streets policy is adding bike lanes at no cost to the city. What type? No funding. All right, sort of a trick question. Probably don't need an agreement because we're probably going to be maintaining the bike lanes. So we probably really just don't need an agreement at all. All right, good job. Any questions about agreement types before I move on?
You had mentioned up there that there's an agreement for reviewing plans. What's the difference between reviewing plans, in terms of what you were speaking about, and the typical review for driveway permits? Are those different type plans that we would be receiving, that we would have to go in the agreement for?
I don't know that we do, when we're doing those review and inspection agreements, it's for usually a traffic signal or, and it may include a driveway permit, actually. I don't know. Is anybody out there in the division who does it? Agreements for driveway permits?
Because I know by the time it gets to P&U, we're not involved in any type of agreements. We're just, the developer will send the plans for review, the division will review. And I didn't know if that's what you were talking about. Is there some kind of agreement that we're not aware of that's in the division, or maybe that's a different type of review, type of plans that you're speaking of?
Yeah, that's a good question. Typically, I mean, we do, I mean, I'm not gonna say we always do an agreement if a developer sends us plans, but I mean, what the division does is set up a 36249 WBS and then gets money, and it could be for anything that they've asked us to review, but I don't know if that happens on a regular basis for just driveway permits. I don't know if there's a funding source out there that the district or division can charge to and not have to set up a separate agreement every time.
I have one more question. What you have on the screen now, it says no agreement. How would maintenance come into play? Is that the assumption that there's no maintenance agreement? And if so,
yes, on this, I'm making the assumption that DOT is maintaining the roadway curb to curb so that there would be no municipal responsibility for maintenance. But, if there were a responsibility for maintenance by the municipality, then we would need an agreement.
I would make an assumption that if it is a multi-path and if the bike lane is a part of a multi-path and is separated from the roadway, then it would be needed agreement for maintenance.
Yes, yes. Anything outside the roadway or, whatever the division has agreed to maintain or not maintain, that's kind of where we're going. All right, well, let's move in a little bit more into detail on the agreement request process. So this is just the basic process for requesting, approving, and executing an agreement. So, the division or the business unit requests the agreement, comes into our office, generate an agreement. We send it back to you all for review. At the same time, we're adding it to the next board agenda, whichever board agenda we're working on that day. Once the agreement's ready to go out for signatures, the other party signs it first. They can use DocuSign, they can still sign paper agreement with ink signature. That's fine, even though we're trying to encourage everyone to move to DocuSign. When it comes back to the department, as long as the board has approved the agreement, then DOT can execute it. So that process of board approval and the other party signing it happens at the same time. If it comes back from the other party and the board date hasn't passed, we hold on to it and it doesn't go down for execution. Once the agreement's executed, everyone's notified. The agreement is filed either in EBS or in our web application, our old system for creating agreements that we're still using. So when do you request an agreement? It really depends on your schedule and when the work will occur. Payable agreements for federal funding must be in place prior to funding authorization. Payable agreements with state funding cannot be generated until the funding is approved by the board. And that's when the WBS gets set up. TIP agreements and utility construction agreements must be in place prior to advertisement. And usually we're recommending starting those no more, no less than a year out from project let. If you go more than a year out, you just run the risk of things changing so much at the local end. They're not really committed to what they want on the project. If you wait much less than a year, then you end up just running up against the let date because you're not giving the other party enough time to go through their approval process and work out all the details. Any work that is solely paid for by the other party, we must have the agreement executed and payment received if it's if a down payment is required before that WBS would be released.
Laura, can I ask a question on that slide? So the first bullet where you say payment agreements must be in place prior to funding authorization, has there ever been discussions about reducing our funding authorization to reflect the payable that we know we're going to get? And I mean, with our money issues and everything, I've often wondered if, because basically we're double counting that money when we fund and we have an agreement in place, correct?
So we're just thinking of it in terms of when we get to authorize the funding from federal highways, we can't make that authorization request until we have that underlying agreement executed that says, hey, we'll reimburse you up to this amount of money. And now we're, then we authorize by each phase. So like for PE, we'd authorize
Right.
a certain amount.
But I guess if we have a construction agreement in place that says the municipality is going to pay us $2.5 million to put in their water line on our project, then really that's $2.5 million that if we fund that full amount, we're paying that 2.5, but we're going to get it back. And so,
But that's not a payable, that's a receivable. If they're paying us, it's a receivable. So when we get that would be like a utility construction agreement. So when we get that executed, we'll go into this a little bit more, when it goes to accounts receivable, they set up like a placeholder for that funding in SAP, and you can see it, it says local, $2.5 million. So that's different from the
okay,
payable
so I
side.
got it backwards, and that's a receivable.
Yeah.
But we still ask for the full amount, even though we know we've got money that's coming in. Does that make sense what I'm
Well,
thinking? Like we're double counting.
I don't know how, on the TIP project, I don't know how that authorization request is made. That's not my department.
Okay. Okay.
There may be some adjustment to that. requesting an agreement. We still have 2 systems to request agreements. We are going to move everything to EBS, but we're still working with 2 different systems. So the web application, which is on the NCDOT intranet, is the old system. It's been in place since, 2008, I think. We're still using it for payable agreements, anything that doesn't have any funding on it, and for utility construction agreements, because our IT team didn't get the template for UCAs in the new portal yet, but that should be coming very soon. So, sorry this is so complicated for how you have to request an agreement. If you need access to the intranet system, email me. I can set you up no time at all, and you can go in and request agreements. For accounts receivable agreements, when the other party's paying us, you're going to go into EBS, the Enterprise Business Services, and you'll need the Municipal Agreements Management file. And we started this last spring. You're going to have to work through your visa coordinator to get access, and we'll kind of go into that. So, yeah, here we go. So the Municipal Agreement Management System, I really want to call it the Municipal Agreement Request System, and then I can start calling it Mars, because it does feel like sometimes we're on a different planet. You have to have a role in EBS to access the system, and your visa coordinator is the one who requests the role. Those of you who also work with local projects, and I know there's several of you in here, if you have both roles, you'll see both of them pop up when you log into EBS, and you have to decide, am I going to do agreements today, or am I going to work on local projects? And you select it. Once you select your role, your inbox looks exactly the same. It just changes your menu and some of your search options, depending on whether you are working on agreements or working on local projects. And I'll point out where the role change form is, so you can access that and give it to your visa coordinator. All right, so for accounts receivable, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on for the rest of this session. Which template do you need? The 3 highlighted are the 3 that are in the EBS portal now. And like I said, the utility construction agreement is coming. So when you come in there, you need to figure out, okay, which one do I select? Use the TIP agreement template when another party has asked for additional work on a project that we are already doing. Or when the other party is participating in project cost. I know we have some TIP projects out there where the local might be, we're using federal money, the local might be providing non-federal match. So you would use the TIP agreement for that. The DOT construction used when the other party asks us to perform the work. So this is not primarily a DOT project. It didn't start off as a DOT project. They just come to us and said, can you do this turn lane? Can you do crosswalk here? Whatever city or developer might ask us to do, and they're paying 100% for that work. And then the review, oversight, inspection, used for any traffic signal review and inspection, or for any work where the other party wants us to provide a review or oversight, and we need some money. We need money to charge our time and effort to. All right, so how does EBS work? I've kind of taken the previous slide and sort of expanded it to talk a little bit about specifically how it works in EBS. So you're going to request an agreement. The option is create pre-agreement request and submit. You're going to, I'll come back and talk a little bit more about this terminology, but you're going to go through and fill out a checklist. Who's the other party? What's the WBS element? What's the work that we're doing? How much money are they giving us? Once you submit it, then again, our office generates an agreement and we send it back to you. It's a workflow. At the same time, we add it to the next board agenda. You all review the agreement. And this is a step that we've built in that we didn't have in the previous system, this sort of workflow and this back and forth. So y'all are gonna review it. This is your opportunity to review it among your staff. Send it to the other party as a draft, especially if it's a complex project or agreement. You wanna kind of just get an idea of what they're gonna be agreeing to. They can review it, mark it up, send it around. If there are changes, then you return the workflow back to us and you say, please make these changes. And you document all that in EBS. We generate another agreement, comes back to you for review. So we go back and forth, round and round, until we get to the point where y'all are happy with the agreement. Then you approve it. When it comes back into our inbox and it's approved, we know it's ready to go out for DocuSign. So we will send it out for DocuSign. Yeah, so this was the review piece that's new from the old portal. When we send it out for DocuSign, there is in the agreement request, there's a field for local agreement coordinator. That's not you, that's not me, it's not Tim. That's the person at the other party who's going to receive the DocuSign request and then specify who on their end is going to sign the agreement. We, and I know you all, don't want to be in the business of trying to figure out and get that information from the city. Who's going to sign? Is it going to be the mayor? Is it going to be the town manager? We need an authorized signer. We don't care who it is. That's up to the other party to decide who's authorized to sign the agreement. We also need some sort of a finance officer. So the local agreement coordinator is going to be that person at the other party, at the city, with the developer, who's going to make the decision on who's going to sign the agreement on their behalf. And when they get the DocuSign request, it will ask them, please enter the name and email of your authorized signer. Please enter the name and email of your finance officer. Let me go back. All right. Once, now they do have the option, if they get that DocuSign request, if they're not doing DocuSign, we do have some towns that we're not using it, they can print out the agreement. They can sign an ink and on the signature page and mail it back to us. We will still DocuSign the chief engineer's signature. So they will receive an electronic copy of the agreement. We'll keep their original signature page that they sign, and they'll just get back an electronic copy of the agreement. The way DocuSign works in EBS is it goes to that coordinator, they put in the names and email addresses, they sign, it comes back to DOT, we've built in a hold date. We put in the date that the agreement, the date of the board agenda that the agreement is running on. The system checks the date every day. At the end of that board date, all the agreements that were set up for that board date go immediately to the chief engineer's office for signing. So we're kind of hands off in this whole process. Pops up into their email inbox. Angela Stahl reviews the agreement, makes sure it did run on the board, and then when she signs off, it goes to Ronnie to sign. If he signs it, it's done. The agreement is fully executed. So this is how we start the DocuSign signing process. It's built into EBS. We've had these IT work with DocuSign and adjusted EBS so that we could kind of interface, or whatever that term might be, to get DocuSign embedded. Then, like I said, the coordinator at the town will enter the names and email addresses of who's going to sign the agreement. If you go in and look at EBS and it says DocuSign in process, you know it's somewhere between the town and DOT, it's somewhere in that range. And you can check the status on the toolbar. There'll be a signing status, and if you click on that, you can get an idea of who signed the agreement and where it is in the process. It's not as detailed as if you log into your DocuSign account. Most people won't be able to see that. I believe it's only going to be Tim, who works in my office, one of us who sends out the agreement. We're going to be able to, go into our DocuSign account and see exactly who signed it with the city and where it is. So if you need more details than what this is telling you, just reach out to us. So we're adding the requester as a CC on the DocuSign transmittal. So if you're out of the division, you've requested this agreement, you should be notified once it's fully executed. And to find the executed agreement, you either look on the DocuSign email that you'll get, but the agreement is also attached to the application that you requested. So you can see how it's going to look. The signed document is the executed agreement, and below that is that summary of signatures that tells you exactly what email address signed the agreement, what time of day they signed it. And then, like I said, as soon as Ronnie Keeter signs it, the agreement's fully executed, this automatically gets attached to the application. We don't have to do any kind of additional steps to attach it. So as soon as he signs it, the date on here is the date of execution. So I just want to take a minute. All right, yeah, this is where I had it. So just want you all to think about the process for a minute. Back in the old days, we had paper agreements. We'd mail 2 paper agreements to the other party. The division would really do that. If you all requested the agreement, you print out 2 agreements, you mail to the party, maybe you emailed it to them, told them to print out 2 copies. They signed both. They mailed them back to the division. If there was a check, they mailed it back with the signed agreements to our office. We would have to take the agreements, see if they ran on the board agenda. If they've already run on the board agenda, we package up a huge stack of paper agreements, send them downtown to the chief's office. He'd have to go and sign every single agreement, 2 copies of each agreement in paper. I remember hearing, I think Terry Gibson, when he was a state highway administrator or chief engineer, he'd just carry a big stack of agreements around to all of his meetings and just sit there and sign them. It took so long. And then, came back to the chief engineer's office, they would package up a big pile of agreements, send it back to our office. We would scan in the signature page and then mail the agreement back to the division. When you would turn around and mail it back to the city. So think of all that time that we've now compressed in this DocuSign process. So that's just to say, please encourage the other party to use DocuSign. It really does help you out. All right, so once the agreement's signed, what happens then? The application in EBS goes to accounts receivable. The status of the application will say agreement signed. It will show up in the inbox. Stephanie Benson and Kaylee are the 2 women in accounts receivable who handle all these receivable agreements. That's kind of what they'll say. And what they then do is convert that application to an agreement. So they, at the top of the page, they have an option to create agreement. It's grayed out on mine. My application wasn't in, I couldn't create an agreement at that point. What this does is it creates a fiscal agreement. And they'll use that fiscal agreement to post a down payment from the other party or set up a placeholder for eventual billing. This is the agreement that you used to look up in ZAC3 in SAP. Y'all are familiar with that. So as part of converting the application to the agreement, all the attachments on the application get carried over to the agreement. The application in EBS starts with a 1 number. Once it gets converted to an agreement, it then gets a 2 number. When I say paper agreement, I'm talking about the agreement that got DocuSign. It should be fully executed before an application is converted to a fiscal agreement. So we get the application signed, or excuse me, the paper agreement signed. We send it over to accounts receivable. They convert that application to a fiscal agreement. An application and an agreement have a one-to-one relationship. There's only one WBS allowed per application and per agreement. So if we have multiple phases, you have to enter multiple applications. And that's where I was going with the idea of you have an agreement for design, you do one first for design, you use the WBS for design, and then you come back, you do another agreement request for the construction costs on the construction WBS. All right, the down payment, one is required. We need it before the WBS can be released, and timing is important. Remember, with the old way, paper agreements, paper checks. Both came into our office. We sent the agreement down to the chief's office to be signed. We sent the check to accounts receivable. Accounts receivable could set up a fiscal agreement without the paper agreement being executed. They could set it up in ZAG 3. We can't do that now. If they get a down payment and the application is still waiting to get signed by the chief, they're calling us and telling us, we need this application because they can't hold on to the check for more than 3 days. So they need to, what we need to do, what we've told the cities is to wait until they're notified that the agreement is executed before they send it their down payment. So again, we have to have the check before we can convert the application to an agreement, but if we get the check before the paper agreement is signed, then we have to kind of manually go in and approve the application, even though the agreement is not fully executed. We don't really want to do that. We want to keep it in the right order. So in all the receivable agreements, we've added this sort of cover memo that describes what the payment terms mean in the agreement and the timing of their payment. And we've gone ahead, because we think what they're doing is they're opening up the DocuSign and they're just blowing right past this first page and they're not really reading it. So we added in an initial box to say, okay, yes, I'm reading this, I understand if I need to pay a down payment, it's due when the agreement is executed and when I'm notified that the agreement is executed. So hopefully this will help with some of that timing. But I know for years, we probably told the developer, sign the agreement and send in your check. And so they were sort of conditioned to do that. Now we've got to say, sign the agreement, but wait till you know that DOT is signed before you send in your check. So how do I find out if the down payment has been received? This is like my old standby. I love this transaction. I use it every single day. But the allotment detail report will show if we've gotten the payment. You can see the type is L for local. That number there, that agreement ID, that's the agreement ID number in EBS. So if you're looking, this might be an easier way than kind of going to EBS to figure out if you've received a down payment. In fact, I'm not exactly sure. I would know how to look it up in EBS. So you could start here, then you could take that agreement ID number and go back into EBS if you want to find any other information. All right, so some terminology. Pre-agreement request is the application in EBS. You'll see that on your menu. The application is the paper agreement with the other party. The paper agreement is DocuSign. When the application is approved, the agreement is in DocuSign, then the application gets converted to an agreement, which is now what we call a fiscal agreement. All right, some resources for you. On our inside site, you get, this is the home screen, you click on Transportation Services, go over to the right-hand side, you'll see a link to Local Programs Management, and once you open up that page, look on the left for Guidance and Resources. There's a folder called Agreements, and then inside there, we've got the second document is the role change form details. That's what you need to give to your BSIP coordinator to get you set up in the EBS. If you need a screenshot and overview and step-by-step how to enter an agreement in and do your workflow, that's the top document, the division overview. Here are the 2022 board agenda agreement deadlines for requesting an agreement. All right, any questions, comments, complaints?
Would you mind going back 2 slides? Yeah, thank you.
Sure, sorry.
No problem.
Y'all are overwhelmed? Yes, sir.
Are you guys provide like a SOP for users to come up with a list of items that are going to be required to work in the EBS, saying, you know, make sure your WBS number is correct, make sure that you have the correct contact, you know, these are the list of items that you need to do before you even start creating an agreement, because once you get in, you don't want to, I don't know this person, or I can't remember,
Right.
something like that, especially for newbies.
Yes, that's a great idea. You know, what I would really like is kind of have a hover, over that checklist, kind of have a hover, you know, where you hover over it and say, okay, these are the kinds of things you need to put in here. That might be able to advance it. I like your idea though, just having a separate document. So, yeah, I will say a couple things about EBS. I will admit it's not the most user-friendly system. We've been using it for local project administration for several years, and I know folks who work with cities, they complain about it. But we are always glad to help you out. If you have questions, we can do Teams shares, screen shares. We can, you know, walk you through it. Please, you know, don't hesitate to ask us any questions. EBS, the one thing that drives people crazy, it times out very quickly. So you might be working on a checklist, you get a phone call, you say, I'll just leave this here. Get another email, or somebody walks into your office and you go back to the checklist and it looks like, okay, I can still finish it. You go to submit or save and it says, oh, we timed out 20 minutes ago. Doesn't give you any warning. So if you don't think you'll be able to finish something in one sitting, or, you know, be focused on it, just go ahead and save it. You can come back and edit it later on. But it times out and it doesn't give you any warning that it's going to do that. Any other questions or comments? I do have contact information here. Tim McHugh, Tim, stand out so they all know who you are. He's our only contract officer right now. We used to have 3 across the state. Tim is, you know, hanging in there, done a great job. This past 6 months, I think, pretty much being on this end. Obviously, I fill in, Madeline helps out, but Madeline's doing local projects, so she's pretty busy too. We are hoping to expand our group a little bit more, get a few more people in, but be nice to Tim. It's important. Anything else? All right, well, thank you again.